And I am Dr. Elisha Rominski from the Department of Communication. I coordinate the Leadership Studies minor and the Communication Leadership Lab at Frostburg State University. So welcome. Thanks for joining us this morning. It is wonderful to be together with people for the Appalachian Festival this way. I think we've seen some really great sessions happening so far, and there's going to be some good music later this afternoon, so we hope you'll join those sessions too. I am really happy to be here today with several partners from different parts of the community and different, membership affiliations, I guess you would say, from our local educational institutions to have a discussion that's serious and needed, but that I think we can be open and honest with each other about concerning safety and justice and how communities should reduce violence together. So I wanted to mention that we have some partners that will be working with us. This is a Choose Civility event, so we are going to talk about those principles of civility that are going to guide our conversation just a bit. But I just want to turn over just for a moment to Renee Mason, who coordinates our local chapter of Choose Civility, to just say hello, maybe just mention mission of Choose Civility briefly, so that helps us to think about what's going to be central to our discussion today. So Renee, can you just say something briefly?
Yes, I'm Renee Mason. I'm the Arts and Graphics Coordinator at the Allegheny County Library System, and I'm the Choose Civility representative. The Choose Civility, for me personally, this has been a great opportunity because of the situation, to bring it's an opportunity just to have this discussion. So I think it's wonderful, and we've been working for a long time to start these kinds of conversations. So thank you for providing this for Frostburg State.
Certainly, yeah, it's been wonderful to work with you and with that whole steering committee, the chapter. We also continue partnership with Allegheny College of Maryland, and Dr. Diane McMahon is with us today. So Diane, do you mind saying just a few words about your participation and the students from ACM's participation today?
Sure. First off, another big thank you to Alicia and Kaylee for organizing this. And I am from Allegheny College of Maryland, which is in Cumberland, Maryland. And with the civic engagement activities, I help coordinate that. And at Cumberland, in our college, we try to get students as involved as we can with deliberative dialogues so that they can learn the skills, the facilitation skills even, of how to talk about tough subjects that people are often very opinionated about, and how to do that in a way that's very respectful of everybody's feelings, stories, where they're coming from, and bringing them fully into the conversation so that we can deliberate and find ways to work together. So thank you very much for having me here.
Excellent. So I'm trying to advance our slides. So I introduced our partners, to help let you know that along with me and Kaylee, they're going to help facilitate the discussion today. So we did talk a little bit about this, being a Choose Civility discussion. Kaylee and I are going to, before we begin, talk a little bit about some of the technology and facilitation kind of guidelines for us. So Kaylee, I'll turn it to you, and you want to pick up with the agenda there.
Okay, thank you. Hi everyone, I am Kaylee Donathan. I am a Leadership Lab Communications lab assistant this semester. I will be graduating in December, but I am so excited to be here with you all today during this event. I would like to touch base on some Choose Civility principles that I think are very important at this time. Pay attention for one, be an active listener, assert yourself, and apologize if anything comes off strong or misunderstanding, and always acknowledge others even when you aren't or are being spoken to. Thank you. And at this time, do you want me to go ahead and speak about the other things too? Okay.
Yep, that's good.
So if you are in here as a guest, I would like you to go ahead and click on the top 3 dots of your menu and then go ahead and hit rename and then type your name in so we know who you are. And then to minimize any background noise, we'd like you to mute yourself when you are not speaking. And if you have any questions, please feel free to add them into the chat or raise your hand. If you click on your name, there will be a little raise your hand button under the participations part, and I will be watching that constantly throughout our event, and I will make sure that all questions and concerns are being monitored and recorded. Thank you.
Thanks, Kaylee. Yeah, just because there's a sensitive, topic of discussion today, or something that can provoke emotional response, some strong opinions, we are going to be taking the precautions we do with all our facilitated events online that we're learning, more how to do every day, and that's, make sure we admit people through a waiting room after pre-registration. We still have some late registrants, so we're admitting some of those folks. We will lock the meeting eventually, though, to kind of close off joining, anyone else joining, so we can kind of just have that conversation with who's present. We are recording this, so just to remind you of that by participating, you are consenting to being recorded. So this session will be shared later, both for educational purposes, but as part of the Appalachian Festival offerings. And I would say that, just relax and enjoy the learning experience, the practice and civility that we're going to experience together. This is an important time to have courage to speak up, not just to protest or to fight. This is actually something that I heard last night in the symposium that was part of the festival, but to come together, to look for some common ground, so these conversations are not necessarily to help us find a consensus today, but to get us thinking about where might those points of consensus begin, so that we better understand each other and, respect where each other's coming from. But we're considering what's on the table already, or could be some new creative ways to be thinking about, these issues. So we are going to be using this framework from the National Issues Forums Institute that offers these different facilitation guides. So if you registered early, you got a copy of this. The PDF version of this is available once we purchase it, and that's part of what the organization offers, is a lot of facilitation materials that help communities have these conversations. The Communication Leadership Lab was actually formed through a learning exchange experience that I was supported to attend through the Kettering Foundation, which supports democratic engagement, and they partner with National Issues Forums Institute. And we actually created a guide about food security, as part of our experience in that cohort. So this was created by some research specialists, at Kettering, probably, to have this guide be available. It's a few years old, so you might have noticed that, but it offers a lot of research and kind of framing of the different issues that we're going to explore today. And they really frame it as options, like, well, should we, deal with this question or these issues this way, or this way? So you kind of take each option separately, but there's nothing that says that our consensus building isn't about integrating those options in creative ways. I did want to also offer that to update this conversation, we have to bring in our current awareness, our current experience, our perspectives, our standpoints. And so we are going to start the conversation with drawing on that. This is just one example of some current news, right? This was just in the New York Times this week, and I just offer it. Facilitators usually don't give opinions, but I'm just offering, this is an example, a snapshot of current events or current phenomenon, current data that helps us think about how to update that guide, as we have the conversation. So you might have some other perspectives or information that might be helpful, as we continue the conversation. So we're going to start with a few voices helping us to understand what is at stake here, with the issues of safety and justice. And in a sense, then, this is about framing the conversation in a way that helps us to know why this is so important to gather, to discuss together. This is a reminder again also that students from our university and our college that are here today, please be part of this conversation. Community members, please be part of this conversation so that across campus and community, we can understand each other's perspectives on what's at stake and why this is so important to work on together. We are going to have some members of law enforcement as well as our leadership from diversity, equity, and inclusion to speak. And I'm actually going to, is Dr. Travis with us? I don't see him. No. Okay. So we're gonna start with, if you don't mind, Ms. Jennifer Braxton. And I'm going to ask each person, I'm going to introduce a few people we've invited to start us with this conversation to just, in a few sentences, so just briefly initially, tell us who you are, what you do, and what's at stake from your eyes, from your point of view. So Ms. Braxton, can you start us off?
Well, good morning. My name is Jenica Braxton, and I work at Frostburg State University in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And we are here to support community acceptance amongst all groups in our campus community. And so with this issue, this is a big issue right now. We're part of a large issue. And what's at stake? Well, as a Black woman in America, what's at stake for me is my family, my friends, people that I know and love, people that I don't know, but who I'm connected to through culture and history. And I know that there's a lot of awareness and acknowledgement about like safety and policing, violence, things like that. Oh man, I just lost it. And I just want people to be aware when we talk that perspectives are different. It's very hard to see something that's not part of your reality. And some people are beginning to see that. Some people are acknowledging that in different ways, but perspectives are different. So things that may seem crazy to you, that can never happen. Things like that do happen. And so what's at stake is people, real lives, relationships. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jenica. We're going to turn next to Chief Smith. And Chief Smith, tell us who you are, what you do, and what's at stake for you, for us.
All right, good morning, Alicia. Good morning, everyone. My name is Cynthia Smith. I'm the Chief of Police at Frostburg State University. I've been in law enforcement for 38 years. I've been in leadership positions in law enforcement for 28 of those 38 years. Look, I recognize and I firmly believe that a couple things. One, police officers, law enforcement generally, are the most visible face of our government and our society. Who's out there 24/7, 365 and representing society and communities. I'm also firmly of the belief that without community support, law enforcement's authority does not exist, because the community is who gives rise to law enforcement authority. I also firmly believe that with that tremendous and awesome authority that law enforcement officers have, comes an even greater responsibility to fairly, equitably, and with justice administer that authority. So, you know, for me, not to, you know, overstate what's at stake, but for me, in this moment in time in this country, the soul of the country is at stake. We're dealing with some very deep-seated issues. So I welcome the chance to participate in this conversation, and I look forward to hearing others' perspectives.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, so we're gonna go to a student perspective now. I think, do we have Tyler with us today?
Yes.
There's Tyler. Hi, Tyler.
Hello, I am a student at ACM, Vice President of the Student Peace Studies Club on campus. For the past year, we have been trying to reform and have focused mainly on matters of equality, activism, and general social equity and fairness. So when we're discussing what is at stake in a topic like this, I mean, we all know this is a key pivotal moment in this country, and really in this world. This is a pivotal moment where issues that have largely gone untalked about are now being talked about. Things are being brought to light. I mean, that's why we are here, to bring these things to light. And so when I'm thinking about what's at stake, I'm thinking of the fact that we have this dichotomy between justice and safety in the way that we discuss crime and violence. And a lot of the time, at least in the past few hundred years, we've fallen more on the side of safety or safety for some, and ignored justice or justice for a large majority of the country. So when I'm thinking of what's at stake, what is at stake, as Cynthia said, is the future of this country, the future, but not just the country, the future of the people in this country, a future where we're either going to be falling down more on the side of security or of justice in the coming years. And it is important to be here together to make sure that whatever comes from this doesn't come down too hard. We want to make sure that the ground we have gained in the past few months stays, that we continue forward, and that we don't lose it to a fear of crime, a fear of a lack of security.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you. So glad that you're part of this discussion. So let's go next to, is Chief Costello with us?
Yes, I am. Good morning, Dr. Rominski. Good morning, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. I'm looking for you to spotlight you. There we go. Okay.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here with each of you. And I'm very proud to be a part of this discussion. I think it's an important conversation to have because, as Chief Smith mentioned in her opening remarks, you know, the police are public servants. The police were always meant to have a close relationship with the community. I think good policing, to function well, was always meant to work in interconnection with the community, not something in isolation from it or not something distinct from it. I think good policing, good quality policing was always meant to be in close partnership and close collaboration with the community. And an important facet of that is to be able to have good relationships with the community, to be able to talk to different people, to be able to hear different perspectives. So I'm the chief of the Frostburg City Police Department, and I'm very, very proud to serve the city of Frostburg. I've lived here my entire life. I wanted to be a police officer in my own community, and to me it's very special sometimes to do the little things like direct traffic at Bell Elementary, where I went to school, and I used to see the police officers when I would come out of school. And I think that's an example of good policing. I think that's just when you have that tie and that closeness and that care for your community and that respect and that sense that you're paying something good forward to others. And I think when you're in an administrative role, when you're in the role of like a chief of police or any police officer, really, your decisions should be informed by the community. There are some things that are informed by the law. There are some things that are informed by policy and best practices, but you're always learning. You're always shaping your views. You're always gathering information from the people you serve and trying to become better and trying to grow and learn. And I think that's what's crucial here. I think it's really, really important that we're able to talk to one another and learn from one another and grow together. I think justice is something that everyone is looking for. Sometimes that means different things to different people, or it has different outputs, or people have different ideas about justice. And the neat thing is when we can come together and talk and share our ideas and really hear each other and fairly represent one another's views, I think we all grow. I think we all become kind of ennobled and enriched and improve in our lives. And I think we understand each other much, much better. So to me, there's really a sense of unity in the community. Even if we don't always agree on every issue, there's a sense that we respect one another and we talk through things and we hear one another's views, and that we are partners as we go through the world and live together and all try to make our communities better and safer and healthier.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are definitely glad you're part of this. You've been in your role how long now?
I've been in this role for just over 2 years. I've worked for the city of Frostburg as a police officer for 14, coming up on 15 years. And something I really enjoy. I go to work every day just so proud that I can serve the community in many different respects.
That's great. Thank you so much. I know that, that we appreciate your leadership.
Thank you so much. It means the world to hear, and the encouragement is always so helpful.
Okay, so we have one more perspective before we get into our deliberations. This is Katie from Frostburg State University.
So just listening to everybody, it's already been a great conversation. The one thing that I thought of the most was just wanting to understand others' perspectives and being able to make sure that everybody is heard. And definitely right now, communities are at stake. If people feel like they're not being heard, it does something mentally and people get very upset, and it's not right for people to not be heard. I think the most important thing right now is to just have these conversations, whether they're uncomfortable or not. You're not going to be able to get away from it. It needs to be talked about. And that's really why I wanted to be here today, just to be a better community member and understand how I can understand other people.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us, Katie. Okay, so think about that question of what's at stake, as a starting point, everybody. And we're going to then start to think about, together what it is that I had a feeling we are missing a slide. But what I will do is I'm going to pull it up on our guide so you can kind of actually peek at our guide to look at that first option. Because that guide, I think, has been helpful. If you didn't take a look at this yet, you can see the guide, right? Okay. It lays out kind of, what deliberation is, how it's distinct from dialogue. Dialogue's usually a lot more about just hearing people out, feelings and kind of standpoints. Deliberation gets more into decision-making kinds of considerations, or, weighing the benefits and drawbacks or trade-offs that you might need to make in decision-making. So these guides offer this. And so the first one, like I said, it offers a lot of research that the first option we're going to consider is this one. So Dr. McMahon, you're going to help lead us in that part of the discussion.
Here I go. All right. So as Alicia said, we're going to go over 3 different viewpoints, and as I have the first one, and hopefully we'll have some conversation after each one. You can either talk or put something in the chat. But just to remind us, our deliberation is about how we should work together to reduce violence and increase safety, while at the same time ensuring justice. So our very first option is talking about enforcing the law together by expanding policing and strengthening police community relationships. So that's the very first option, to expand policing and strengthen police community relationships. So some things that you can think about with that, or that we'd like you to talk about or share, is how would this option work to help bridge the divides? And what would be the trade-offs of this option? Would you be satisfied if you used only this approach? Why or why not? So again, expanding policing and strengthening police community relationships. Can anybody add something to that? Love to hear you.
I'll pipe in. This is Chief Smith. So I'm not, this might surprise some folks. I'm not enamored of this particular option. And to kind of begin with, just the way that it's presented here, and it kind of gets you some insight into my thinking. The way it's presented, expand policing while strengthening community police partnerships. I think that that's presented backwards, because without those partnerships, without that community trust, it's my feeling that this notion of when I hear expand policing, that sort of speaks to me to more police, more visible police, more enforcement in the communities. And I don't know that that's helpful in a community that doesn't trust its police. That trust is so, so critical. And so, I mean, and I'll also tell you my philosophy. I come to law enforcement with, you know, if you know much about some law enforcement theory, you know, there's sort of the warrior model of law enforcement, and there's a guardian model of law enforcement. I'm in the guardian model camp fully and completely. And so I think when we talk about this option, we need to be deliberate about what exactly is it we're talking about, because I just don't believe that more police are the answer. I think, you know, after basically a lifetime in law enforcement, I think you have to have adequate resources to effectively do the job of keeping communities safe and working with communities to do that. But I also think, sort of on the other side of the balance on that issue, I think that our communities, or in some cases, it's the interface with the political system, our elected leaders are asking the police to do too much. I think police are being asked to solve problems that are much more complex and impossible to solve from an enforcement standpoint. So that option, that's kind of some of my quick thoughts. Hopefully that'll prompt someone else to speak up.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can somebody add to that, or say another perspective related to that? Or your own perspective?
I don't have a real different perspective from Chief. I think she's very in tune with that idea. The way that it's stated can sound very scary to people and in communities where that trust is not there. And that's really what it's all about. People questioning, well, why are you here? What is at stake for me when you show up? So the partnership and the trust has to be there first. And then also hearing the words enforce together. I think of 17-year-olds running down the street with assault rifles, untrained, with motives, motivation, influences unchecked, and people who are supposed to be protected getting hurt because people who are not trained and trained properly are trying to police.
Thank you, Jenica. That is a really good point and a good perspective to bring up. Does somebody else want to add to that? There's a lot of good information there.
I could say a couple of words. So just a few thoughts. One of the things I mentioned at the outset is I think for policing to really be functional and to really work well, it has to be closely connected to the community. There has to be that partnership with the broader community in law enforcement. In some respects, that was one of the early principles of policing. If you go back to some of Sir Robert Peel's principles when they established the Metropolitan Police Department, there were concerns that we see sort of echoed today about the police being kind of like an occupying force or, something distinct from the community. And one of the principles that came out of this era was that the police were part of the community and had a specific role in law enforcement. And likewise, the community plays a law enforcement role as well, not in terms of vigilantism. That obviously is highly concerning. The idea is that the community is sort of unified and sort of has a common and shared interest in safety and security and respect. And the police were the people specifically tasked with law enforcement duties, meaning conducting formal investigations and making arrests. But I think the idea was the community would be sort of the eyes and ears of the police as well, and have that, again, that common, that shared interest. I think the idea is it was supposed to be a partnership for joint interests in safety and in reduction of crime and a lot of these social problems. So I think, again, I think that comes full circle to some of those old ideas and some of the modern concerns that we really kind of want to work together. We want to share ideas together. We want to collaborate together. And that could be a neighbor who maybe witnessed a burglary and shares that information with the police. In some communities where you have distrust, you have witnesses to very serious crimes who won't give that information to the police. Perhaps they feel the police can't protect them. Maybe they're concerned about retaliation, or maybe they don't like the police or don't want to help the police. And that's where you start to see that dysfunction and that fragmentation within a community. And I think that collaboration extends today also to formal organizations when we try to tackle social issues that are beyond the ability of the police to totally handle, like addictions. We partner with folks like the health department, and we have, for example, we have the opioid task force. We meet monthly at the health department. We talk to health officials. We talk to educators in the school system. We talk to social workers. I think that's another manifestation of that idea of partnership and collaboration to tackle these issues as a community. So I would agree that just strictly more and more police with no real strategy and no real plan is not an effective solution. But I think that idea of community partnership and working together toward common interests is a very important baseline.
Thank you. Community and collaboration, so important. Thank you for bringing that up. Tyler, I think you were next. You wanted to say something?
You'll have to forgive me. I'm not a public speaker, despite what Diane wants me to be.
I think you are.
But so when I'm looking at this issue, when I'm looking at this option of just increasing policing, we can talk that we can say that it may and probably would have a definitive effect on safety and can act as a deterrent force. But we're also talking about justice here. We're talking about reducing crime, but we're also talking about social equity and social fairness. So an increase in police in the streets, it does nothing to deal with the underlying factors that bring about the crimes that we're asking the police to then step in and fix. We're treating the police as Neosporin on a wound, as just as punishing crime that's already happened, instead of us working together and us talking about, well, what are these factors? What are causing these issues? It's like Cynthia and Nick both said, we are asking too much of our law enforcement. We're asking them to do and be everything rather than trying to bring about conditions that result in a lowered crime rate like we've had before. Instead, this option is asking us to just further to just further rely on the police, further rely on an already bloated and failing criminal justice system. It's asking so much while not providing anything in the realm of justice, because I guarantee you that forgive me, I lost my thought. But I guarantee you that some of the zeitgeist of our political justice era did not come about as a result of a lack of police. Eric Garner was not killed because there was not enough police. We don't have a drug epidemic in Cumberland, Maryland because of not enough police. The problem isn't we don't have enough police. The problem is we as a community, we as a society are failing, and we're asking the police to address the failures of us as a society and us as a country. It hasn't worked yet, and just putting more boots on the street is not going to solve anything but increase the already rampant distrust within communities towards police.
Okay, great points, Tyler. Talking about some of the very deep-rooted structural issues that are at stake, and that police can't fix things. But the deeper issues maybe need to be addressed. I'm going to let Cassie talk, but before I do, Elias said, I wanted to share this with everybody. I don't think increasing the number of police officers can reduce crime necessarily. There is a need for quality officers over quantity, and hiring more and more officers will be difficult with given budgets. Great point. Okay, Cassie, do you want to talk now?
Sure, and I'll make it brief. First, Tyler, you are certainly a public speaker. I'm not sure what you were talking about. You're wonderful. Congratulations, honestly. So while I'm thinking about increasing sort of community policing, so we're talking about building that relationship between the police and the community, one of my critiques of that model is that, you know, the community has biases. You know, here in our local community, I feel like community members are more likely to report a Black person potentially committing a crime over a white person maybe behaving the exact same way. Or in Frostburg, I feel that they're more likely to call over a student doing, you know, who might be doing something, over calling about another local who may be doing the exact same thing. And so, to some extent, I tread lightly the idea of community policing and putting that onus on us to identify crime, because we cannot trust that those biases won't continue to be perpetuated. So until we address those structural issues that Tyler alludes to, we have to consider whether really the community is the best reporting mechanism. I've also heard us all use the word justice a lot. You know, as a writer, you know, I recognize that words have a variety of different meanings to a variety of different people. But I think when we talk about justice, one thing we should all aim to do is really to talk about it in its most pure form, you know, which is moral righteousness. You know, we ought not pervert the idea of justice by saying, well, this law is justice, or this action is justice carried out. You know, let us use that word in its most pure form, because it really does mean something so much bigger than sometimes the way we use it. And that's all.
Thank you. That's really great. Thanks, Cassie. Also, Alexis said, I think we need to focus on how the police will form relationships with the community. So back to trust, building relationships, all so very important. So we need to move on, but before we move on, I just wanted to mention that there has been some work on developing a community relations board with the help of the NAACP, the local branch, and Tom Bowling at Frostburg State University, bringing together a diverse number of community leaders that are real, and students who are really dedicated to building better relationships. And maybe that's a key takeaway from this option. So thanks, Alicia. I think we're ready for the next.
Yeah, Renee, are you ready to take us into the second option? Is that you, Renee? I'm not sure. Did we lose Renee? Because maybe Kaylee, we can have you step in if I'm looking to see. Oh, I see you there, but we can't hear you for some reason. So
Try again. Here we go.
yeah, there you go.
For option 2, apply the law fairly by removing injustices, reforming inequities, and improving accountability. So how would this work to address the community, safety, and justice? Or how would it be a challenging option? Would you be satisfied if you used only this approach? Why or why not?
So I'll keep up my track record if that's okay, and I'll jump in first. I really like this one because I think this option highlights a deeper dive into the structural problems. You know, whether that be I give a sort of a basic example. Hypothetically, you know, the disparate impact of an individual who's living in poverty and struggling to make ends meet, trying to do all the right things, but gets a traffic citation and doesn't have the funds to pay the fine, and has to make a choice between getting paid for the day or going to court, and ultimately doesn't do either, and gets close to that vortex of, I'll call it vortex of injustice. And time goes on, and that unpaid fine turns into additional, more serious traffic violations, additional fines, and ultimately loss of license, or worst case scenario, time in jail. I don't profess to have the answers to how to fix that, but I think that is kind of an example of an injustice and to a certain extent an inequity. Now, it doesn't necessarily address the accountability aspect. I think that one is perhaps more geared to the accountability of the system generally, and law enforcement specifically as it relates to use of force. But there are a lot of things about this particular concept, this particular option, that I think we would do well to spend more time thinking about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Smith. Would anyone like to add to that?
Well, I guess I'll stick to the trend too. So I think on the surface, that is an attractive option to me. It looks attractive. But I think about what Cassie said about the purest form of justice, and brings in the example that Chief said. Well, to her, that person who is in a different place in life, and that perspective that I was talking about when I opened, the perspective. So a traffic citation can, to some people, just be a traffic citation. Oh, this is this amount of money, something annoying to deal with. And to someone else, it can be the 10th thing, the 10th drastic thing on their list of how life is against them, or how it's taking them further away from moving forward, being successful, just surviving. Because I don't know how many people have thought about a citation the way the Chief explained it. Now, paying this fine, or maybe she said, I don't know if she gave this example, but paying the fine or being able to buy dinner for your family, paying the fine going to court to address the fine or getting paid for a day's work. So that perspective, what does a traffic citation mean and to people in different places? And sometimes it can be just where a person is in their life. And I will just share this, that I've been on ups and downs financially in life. I've had some really high highs where the traffic citation could just be a citation to me. And I've had some really low lows where a traffic citation is, okay, I was this close. I did not have any room for anything else to go wrong, or everything's falling apart. So I've been able to see like some of that. So for that option, well, what is justice? How do we really attack that? How easy is it fixed? How much easy is it to fix injustice? How much time does it take? Who's involved? What is the injustice that we're talking about? So I think on the surface, it's a beautiful ideal, but what does it mean? And without spoiling number 3, I'll say that this one alone, I would not take just this one alone.
So thank you, Jenica. It sounds like we have considerations of taking parts from each or not of the options. Who would be like to be next?
Remember, don't be shy, students, speak up. I know some of you already have, but we've got some voices we haven't heard from. And if a starting point is in the chat, that's fine.
Elias, would you like to read from what you wrote there? So I'll go ahead and read it. Elias says, I agree with this option. Addressing implicit bias and racism through proper training is something I have done myself through my time with residence life. I think it could be beneficial for police officers to do the same. I believe each individual have biases, assumptions, or different viewpoints which shape how they act. This is not about blaming the police, but rather identifying and acknowledging how to respond to certain situations without letting these biases drive our decisions. That's excellent.
I'd be glad to say a couple words. Excellent points by all the speakers and by Elias there as well. I think this issue here, the broad topic of injustice and inequity and those sorts of things, I think that really is the most complicated when it's approached very broadly. But I also think it's at the root of many, many of the issues that we're talking about today. I think it's at the root of many of the concerns nationally today regarding police and the community. And it's complicated to fix. I mean, these are powerful, socioeconomic forces that have contributed to things like poverty and wealth and, financial class and those sorts of things. And it is very difficult. And I think what makes it difficult a lot of times for the police is, if you take the traffic citation example, I think that was an extraordinarily realistic example. I think if you take someone who is in a hard place financially or has just a lot of challenges and they're going a little bit over the speed limit and they get a ticket and they can't pay it, and going to court, like Chief Smith said, means they have to take the day off from work and lose more money. It's not really always it's not kind of like the idea of, well, I can't pay the ticket, so I'll go to court and the judge will come up with a fair solution. In reality, they can't go to work and they don't get paid, and that just compounds the problem. There are real challenges there, and I don't know that there are easy solutions. And I think what happens sometimes with the police is the police get pulled between many competing interests. It's like you want to be fair to everybody, and you need to recognize that, and recognize when somebody's having a hard time and a ticket is more serious to somebody in that situation than perhaps to somebody else. But you also get complaints from the community. You get complaints from neighbors who are mad that people are speeding down their neighborhood, that their kids are out playing and they almost, they have close encounters with speeding vehicles or careless drivers, maybe in like an interstate setting or like a larger area. You might have some serious motor vehicle crashes and fatal motor vehicle crashes and those sorts of things. So I think a lot of times, the police are in a challenging position where you have many, many different legitimate interests to accommodate, legitimate interests to be concerned about. It's like on one hand, you want to be responsive to your community and you want to be responsive to real community concerns, things that in those scenarios, could even involve life and death. If you're having high risk traffic problems, if you've had a history of fatal crashes or serious crashes, the police are trying to respond to that. But you're also trying to be responsive to people, and you're trying not to over police and be too heavy handed. It can be a difficult balance at times, I think, when you're trying to respond to competing interests. But I think just a final thought, I think a lot of the root issues with poverty and economics and a lot of these things are really, really deep rooted and are much more complicated than the police can appropriately react to or resolve. But at the same time, I think we can be informed by that. I think that can help us take a look at maybe how we do things and look for better ways. And these types of conversations are one way to do that. We may not walk away with the solution today, but I'm going to walk away, and we may walk away together and think maybe there is a better way. And it's sometimes from those seeds that solutions grow.
Thank you, Chief Costello. One of the things yesterday, I watched a mindful policing with the Center for, were you on that session? What was with Dr. Jim Gordon. And I found that just the approach with the mind and the body and the soul is, I don't know if you had seen that. Did anyone else watch that yesterday? So that was very helpful in starting with your own self, being able to take care of yourself before trying to help others. And I think those kinds of, not only providing it for people in the community, but for the officers would be good too. Did you want to talk any about that, Alicia, a little bit?
Yeah, I wanted to make sure we shared the resource. So I am going to put that in the chat. There was a YouTube, link that you can
Watch that
view.
again.
Yeah,
Yes,
so I
very
thought
good.
that, as a facilitator, I'm usually not adding in a whole lot, but I just want to mention that when Chief Costello mentioned that awareness, kind of, that people maybe need to have more empathy, that came up in this mindful policing session.
So do we have any more? It looks like we are about, let's see, a few more minutes. We have a couple more minutes before we need to go to option 3. Let's see, we have Cassie. Would you like to go ahead and read yours?
Sure. It is interesting to think about how classism plays into policing. That Venn diagram overlaps pretty significantly. And my issue is not necessarily that poverty exists, but it's that we view poverty as bad and paint those in poverty as somehow lesser. And we seem to assume that those in poverty will commit crimes, when in fact, because we have classified some crimes as petty and sort of low level versus those white collar and sophisticated crimes, what we've achieved is to justify over punishing poor people who commit crimes, while rich folks seem to get mere slaps on the wrist. So it is interesting how these play into one another. And if we were to look at option 2, which is to remove injustices, this will be a good place to start. Would be to look at how much time and what the restitution is for these crimes that we think only those in poverty commit, versus the amount of time that you might spend in jail for a white collar and sophisticated crime. That would actually be a really useful police reform and justice reform.
Thank you. And is there anybody else?
Looks like Lita had a comment in there too. Lita, do you want to share that? Maybe we can capture it for you. Renee, do you see that?
I don't see it.
Okay, maybe. Okay, so I'll read it. It says, bias viewpoints are all affected by individual core values. Here in our area, I do not see what I see in our TV news. There seems to be a more calmer situations here. But when I see what local areas post on their Facebook timelines do show how the fear that is put in the political party they endorse. Wait, I'm losing track. This is good. Let me see. Does show more injustice, misunderstandings on racism, and how to even understand how they think that to protest or to speak for a cause is labeled by some local areas an act of troublemaking. Thank you, Lita, for sharing that. There are a lot of things that brings up. Does anyone want to respond to that? Just anything, last comment on this option?
Just one quick comment. Actually, this reminded me, and Cassie's remarks reminded me as well. I wanted to mention one concern I have, and I don't know the solution, is the sometimes extraordinary collateral consequences of minor criminal offenses. That concerns me a lot with regard to poverty and some of the economic class issues and that. A lot of times, you know, if somebody gets in trouble for something minor, I think the idea was that it's a minor crime, it's a petty offense, the court will treat it as a minor offense and, you know, maybe give the person probation before judgment or put it on the stat docket. And often based on the context and the situation, that's appropriate. But the problem I see is that the person has to continually explain that to every employer, to every educational institution in many situations. And in a lot of those cases, to me, the punishment there, the practical effect there far exceeds what the crime ever was. You see that with things as small as traffic tickets. You know, for a lot of people, it's not really about the traffic ticket. It's about how your insurance rates go up. And I understand the rationale there. For other folks, that's not about they got in trouble once for disorderly conduct or, you know, maybe some minor offense. It's that they have to explain this to try to get into school, or they have to explain this to try to get a job. Even people who have been in more serious trouble, who you know, we believe that people can be reformed, and we believe people can have a new life and start fresh. But sometimes they can't get into school or can't get jobs because of these backgrounds. With that said, there are legitimate interests that schools and employers have in protecting students from people who have a history that would indicate a danger or a problem. So there are, again, just like the comments I made earlier, there are competing interests. There are legitimate concerns on all sides, but I do have very real concerns about the sometimes extreme collateral consequences to some of these issues.
Okay.
Excellent
Okay.
point.
Oh, sorry, Renee.
Go ahead. Excellent point there.
Yeah, I think, so we'll keep this conversation going. I actually am going to pause to ask Ms. Braxton or Chief Smith or Chief Costello, the mention of training came up, bias training from one of our students. I think that was your community member to, you know, be an important part of this. Any thoughts on that, or, you know, anything you can tell us about what the FSU or the departments are doing on training, bias training or diversity training, or?
So yeah, and I didn't want to jump in and address that comment. It's a great comment, and it's a great observation. Didn't jump in because I don't want to be defensive or appear defensive, but that is definitely something that we do. Our entry-level officers get inherent bias training in the academy, And it's something that we here at FSUPD do reinforce and retrain frequently on. And honestly, it's something that, you know, training can occur just in your day-to-day conversations with the folks with whom you work. So we try to make, or I try to make that as sort of the leader over here, part of some of our lunchtime conversations. Because look, let's face it, we all have inherent bias, and you know, it's not necessarily the bias that's inherent in all of us based on our life experiences that's has a negative or should have a negative connotation. It's sort of, how does that manifest itself in our interactions with others, right? Because, you know, some of us like chocolate ice cream and some of us like vanilla ice cream and some of us like strawberry ice cream. Well, those would all be bias, right? I mean, it's kind of a simple, stupid example, but so those biases aren't necessarily bad or good, they just are. And so I think, you know, and not only, you know, yes, definitely, the police need to be aware of it, the police need to train on it, it needs to be front and center in our day-to-day duties. But the community generally, people also have biases. And, you know, one example that I speak to that we try to look at FSUPD, we view ourselves as part of the educational process, right? We're policing on a university campus, so we are part of the educational process. And for our students who come from the more urban areas, Baltimore City, for example, Prince George's County, Maryland, for example, you know, their relationships and their experiences with their police may not have been that great, to put it mildly, right? So these folks may come to the university with a bias to the point where, you know, when university police show up and we're there in a helping mode, right? Maybe it's you know, an extreme alcohol poisoning case, right? And we're there to help. We need to get the person medical help, right? Well, we may not be viewed as being in that helping role because the bias is the police are here now, I'm in trouble, which might not be the case, and probably isn't the case. So we have one-on-one conversations with our students. We talk to our students about that. You know, hey, give us a chance, get to know us. We may be a little bit different. We're people too. We may be different than what you're used to. So, you know, this whole notion of bias, I think, is central to a lot of the things around all of these discussions.
Thank you.
Ms. Braxton, do you want to say anything about FSU and what you see happening at that level of education with bias training, or how that should show up in the community even too? I'm just going to, again, kind of add in here because I think this is an important time for thinking about education.
I agree. I think it is a very important time for education and enlightenment. And I will say that there have been different opportunities, but they're just that, opportunities. And people who show up to take advantage of those opportunities are not always the people who need the enlightenment the most. Sometimes it becomes preaching to the choir. So hopefully we can move into a space, and in our office we are working on getting some more training in, but hopefully we can move into a space where everyone is having the same experience of being educated. And this is important, and we value this education enough to make it the priority, you know, a priority. Kind of like, we know that cybersecurity is important and we need to be trained on that because we have to protect the university and our information. So that's a priority. So hopefully we are beginning to understand that this training, bias training, being aware of who you are, what your perspective is, what you come with, and then how to deal with that as you interact with humans, you know, it will make for a better experience for us together. But we have to, so we know that there are only a certain number of people on this call, and maybe some more people would have, you know, as an example of others coming in to get the same information. This, again, an opportunity. So hopefully we're moving in that direction.
Thank you. Yeah, and I don't mean to put anyone on the spot. So, if you do have any other thoughts on that with the training or education piece, please add it in. We are going to transition to the next option that Kaylee's going to lead. And one thing I would say is that this will be recorded and available to be shared, to be able to be viewed by more, even if people aren't here. So that's one of the hopes, is that, we continue to do all kinds of forms of education. And I think the best is when we're, actively participating in that. And that's the hope, right? Is that that engaging kind of education is happening for people on these topics. So Kaylee, do you want to help us to frame this next option?
I sure can. So option number 3 is de-escalate and prevent violence. So address the causes of violence and take direct actions to disrupt conflict. So give me anything that you got going on in your head right now. I'm willing to hear it all right now because I am very intrigued in this whole entire event. I've been taking notes back and forth on everything, watching a chat, and I'm very curious to see what you guys have to say about this option.
So so not to break a streak, my comments on this option are going to be really short, and they're going to consist of 3 words, and that is yes, yes, and yes.
Why is that?
I didn't think you'd let me off the hook that easy.
No, not this time.
Because de-escalation and prevention of violence, right? I mean, think about that for a minute. If you're successful in preventing violence, whether that's, diffusing a disagreement between 2 individuals, or whether that's, being able to intervene early on to prevent a gang war, right? That prevention key is so important, and I don't think that generally law enforcement focuses enough on that, because law enforcement generally is just too busy dealing with things that have already gotten beyond that intervention point where you even have a chance to prevent. The de-escalation piece, that one is something that's important, and de-escalation training, a de-escalation mindset on the part of those guardian law enforcement officers, right? Difference between warrior and a guardian, I think is critical to maintaining a good relationship with your community. And I think that developing those skills to be able to de-escalate are just so important. And part of it is, I've been doing this a long time. I said I've been in this for 38 years, right? That's, my whole adult lifetime. Probably some of the students on the call, it's more than twice their whole entire lifetime from the time they were born. And what I've seen and what I think is probably mistaken is this sort of militarization of civilian law enforcement. This sort of response to the gang members, if I can use that terminology, having higher firepower than law enforcement must meet that force with force and one up them. I think there are times when that is necessary, don't get me wrong. It's necessary sometimes to have a forceful intervention. But it seems to me that the focus on that in law enforcement circles and the focus on officer survival training, terminology such as the war on crime, I think has gotten us as a society in the mindset in terms of our law enforcement, community servants, right? But we've gotten our law enforcement in a mindset that's far too biased towards the enforcement, and far too biased towards an us and them mentality. And it goes back all the way back to, recruitment. How are we recruiting officers? What are we looking for in officers? And I'll share with you, we'll share with this relatively small group, one of my biases. I do think that one of one of the things that would be very helpful going forward would be to have more women in law enforcement, right? That's a bias. I'm not saying to the exclusion of our male counterparts, but I mean, if you look at it statistically, female officers are statistically less likely to use force. Well, right? Why is that? I mean, we could have a whole nother half a day session times a week on that, with conversations about why that might be. But, you know, without getting too far down that tangent, I just really think that, you know, this option is one, I think that this is not an easy option, just as the number 2 option is not easy. But I think there are things that would be where we could implement some strategies to move towards this option on the part of, you know, individual departments, that would be helpful in the short run.
Thank you for sharing that wonderful option that you had. I'm sure it wasn't easy to say some of the things that you said, but it's what needs to be said most times. And yeah, it is hard for people to hear it, but it's your opinion, and that's all that matters on that note. Thank you. Anyone else? Any of the students want to say anything? I'd like to hear your side, Katie. Tyler, you got anything for us?
So I can say this. So we're at number 3, and for me, option 2 and option 3 are kind of interconnected, because in 2, when you talk about applying the law fairly and getting at those inequities and injustice, and then number 3 talks about addressing the causes of violence. And sometimes that's just it. You put people are put in a situation where they literally have to choose between survival and what society has set up to say is wrong, right? And I think we are, as humans, we are hardwired to survive. So people do what they need to do to survive. So taking those 2 options together, getting at the heart of what is causing the violence, what's causing these conflicts and disrupting the peace that is the goal. And then getting at that, and then hopefully finding ourselves in a place to really apply what we agree on as a society is the law. This is the best. This is what we think is the best for us. And yeah, so this is where those connect to me. 3's finally out there.
Well, thank you for sharing. Does anybody have any thoughts on, do you think that it's okay to bring violence in when it's needed? Do you think it's okay to bring violence at all, even if it's not needed?
I could make a couple remarks if you don't mind. That actually sort of ties into some of the comments I had in mind anyhow. I think the comments that our colleagues here have made are absolutely wonderful. And one of the things I distinctly remember in my police academy that they did really, really well was they taught us verbal de-escalation. They called it verbal judo. And it's basically, you know, it's basically just human nature. I think everyone knows, you know, maybe if you're at a potentially adversarial or heated interaction with somebody, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a classmate, and you're having a heated discussion. The way you approach that and the way you talk to that person can substantially influence the outcome. In other words, I mean, you can talk it up and escalate it, or you can talk it down and calm it down. It's not totally within your control, but you have a serious influence on the outcome there and how that goes. So in terms of just your typical day-to-day policing, I mean, your common calls for service, your common interactions with the public and the folks that you deal with, the best approach by far, the right approach and the ethical approach, is to de-escalate things, to talk to people, to calm things down. Because in policing, you see people at their worst. I mean, you see people in highly agitated states. You see people who are extraordinarily angry. You see people who might be arrested, who might know they're going to be arrested. It could be for domestic violence. Maybe they've just assaulted their spouse or something like that. It could be a vast number of scenarios. And, you know, by far the best and correct approach is to talk to people in a calm way, to calm things down, and to de-escalate. There are things that they taught us really well in the academy that I think are worthy of discussion. One of the things I'll say very quickly, if you notice in each of these topics that we've talked about, I find myself looking at the legitimate interests on all sides and balancing. I don't pretend to have the answers to all of these really complicated problems, but I think when we can look at these different interests and recognize them, I think that's how we get closer to finding a good solution and a good way to make it work. One of the things they did well in my academy too is they showed us a lot of dash cam videos and you know, this was a little bit before cell phone video was a thing, but you would see situations where a police officer didn't control the scene and they let it get out of control and they let someone through that be killed or injured. You know, you see people with firearms and weapons on traffic stops, people who don't act rationally, people who will take a gun and shoot the police officer unexpectedly. So there's a little balance there where you have to talk to people in the right way and you have to de-escalate things and you have to be respectful. But there is a little sense that you have to be aware, you have to have that healthy awareness and you have to have that healthy level of control of a traffic stop or a police incident so that you protect the public and protect the folks at the scene and protect yourself. Because a lot of these scenarios are not always as rational as we would want them to be. But again, I think these are your less likely scenarios. I think that can be sometimes taken too far to where you're almost too hyper vigilant, to where it's no longer just your basic safety precautions and your basic awareness. It's you've gone too far to where you're not de-escalating and you're not talking to people in the right way. The last thing I wanted to mention, you mentioned violence specifically. I think what also we have to keep in mind is the police are asked to do many different things. It can be as simple as just helping a person in need. Maybe they're lost and need directions. And a moment later, if there were an active shooter situation, if there were a home invasion robbery involving a firearm, if someone was shot. Chief Smith's mentioned, you know, gangs. I mean, certain communities have very violent crime, very serious crime, and the police are expected to handle that as well. So you get police in many different roles, pulled in many directions. It's like you want to be a police officer who can talk to people and be calm and be empathetic and respectful. I think that's your default on your normal interactions with people. But you also expect a police officer to be able to respond appropriately to an active shooter, to someone who is actively killing innocent people in a school or in a business or a public place. I mean, these are just horrific things to even think about, but they are things that the police are asked to be able to respond to in a moment as well. So it's a lot of different interests, and it's how do you train people the right way, and how do you recruit the right people who can go from one to the other, who can be the warrior when the warrior is necessary to save lives and to stop active and serious deadly violence. And at the same time, how do you get that person trained and the right mentality to be able to interact with people on a day-to-day basis in those more common, you know, scenarios of a traffic stop or a call for service or assisting someone who's lost. So, you know, I think there's a lot of interest, and I think the police are expected to do a lot of different things, and that can shift very quickly. So I don't, you know, necessarily pretend to have the perfect answer. I think broad training, I think intense training, I think the academies do a good job with that, and I think the more we invest in training and the more we invest in that, the better off we are. I think that's where you're more likely going to get people adept at these different things. But just some thoughts, you know, about the many different interests and the many different factors, many different issues the police have to address.
Thank you for sharing that. That does clear up a lot of things that I'm sure many of us had questions about. and it does make it seem more of a direction and more of a understanding for people who have seen the violence or who have been through the violence as well. Thank you.
So I heard you mention the violence and is it appropriate to bring it in and things like that. And so when I think of that, I think it's important to be aware of language and packaging. So Cassie was talking about those, what we consider in society as those sophisticated crimes versus the one society turns their nose up at. And I think that kind of idea is true when we talk about violence. When certain people use violence, it can be viewed as okay or necessary. And then certain other people, it's horrible and we're outraged. So I think it's important to be aware of how information is given to us as a society, how it's packaged, and the language that's used. Like Chief Costello talked about the war on crime. War, for a lot of us, has a certain connotation. It's a bad thing, it's dangerous, it is scary to us, and so we attach that to crime. And then when we talk about that, we talk about, it's usually used in a context, it's talking about people who are more disadvantaged and less supported in our society. So when we talk about the war on crime, we're not talking about a war on white collar crime, but it's crime. And it affects a lot of people, very real and damaging effects. But that's not how society packages that for us. So, and then we think about this war on crime and why were those words chosen? Why are they chosen to talk about this kind of crime and not that kind of crime? And why is that crime viewed as more serious and dangerous and worse than others? Same thing with the violence. So if you are at a peaceful protest and force is used, violence is used to control you. So to control your voice or to control your action. So that violence that's used can be viewed as, whew, all right, they came in, they helped, this is good violence. But it's not. So I think it's just important. I just want to make sure people are aware of the messaging that's being given to us as a society and what could be the reason behind it. Why would someone want to frame it that way? And so Chief Costello talked about, the ripple effects of coming in contact with the criminal legal system. So you get something on your record, but then you have to explain it. You can't get into this position or get this job or into this university. But if we talk about this war on crime, we have these certain people caught up in that loop of crime. Then we disrupt their future. What's really, are we unaware that this is a disruption? Or is the disruption a tactic to get to an end, to keep a picture painted? Just things to think about.
So Janica, you just said a mouthful. And I just want to let you know that two things. One, you just blew me away. Nothing that you said was a surprise to me, but I think you are so spot on that I hope you will continue to carry that message forth and continue to talk about that. There were so many points, I mean, my head's spinning, but the one that I think is maybe at the core of it is with this notion of language is important, right? What we say and what the words that we use are so important. And and there are so many ramifications of how we use them, particularly when people in power use particular words, right? Defund the police, right? I've yet to see a definition of what that means, and I think it means many different things to many different people. But you have got to hang on to that whole concept and continue to talk about that. Continue to talk about that with your student peers and others, because it's with folks. Look, I'm at the age and point in my career where I have limited opportunities to make a difference going forward. You have many opportunities to make a difference going forward. And I just look forward to watching you and seeing you do that. That was awesome.
Oh, thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief Smith. That was very, very nice. All right, now we are going to get back to Dr. Amensky as we get ready to wrap it up here.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to just, we have just a couple minutes left, and if you're willing to take time to think a little bit about if we have any common ground as we reflect on what we've discussed or what you've heard today, if there's any points or starting points of consensus building, if there's anything creative that's a new insight that's come up for you. One thing I think about is that these kinds of discussions are about picking up the things that we experience in society, like a rhetorical construct like defund the police, and how you then open that up to have a discussion. I mean, when you think of it that way, it is a gift if we can get there. If we just debate it, and people can't get past owning that word in some set way, and they don't explore what's provocative about that, I mean, I think that's where we're going to face real challenges. So hopefully, these kind of conversations help us do that. So not just on that phrase, but in general from this conversation, are there any final reflections on where you see some common points or some common ways that we might move forward on addressing safety and justice together?
Alicia, I think this is a great place to start with conversation, with coming together, different perspectives. And Chief Smith said to keep talking about these things. And people who are here who heard a lot and listened and did not necessarily have anything didn't share verbally or in the chat, but are here. That's so important to learn and to be open. And I come from a perspective of an educator, so I'm always about the learning, but learn, investigate. There's so much information that can just come to us and we don't have to do the work to get it. But I would encourage you, with any position or point that you get, that you seek out a different side, even if it seems very against how you seem to naturally feel. Find out what other people are saying. There may be value in it, there may not be, but learning, getting a full or a more complete, a broad picture is very valuable to us, right? So keep learning about issues and being a part of conversations.
Thank you. Thank you. I think Katie also wanted to say something, and we'll maybe just take one or two more comments and wrap it up.
I just wanted to add that, especially talking about language and perspective, just to understand somebody else's viewpoint, that's the biggest part of starting the conversation. My father and I have a very different viewpoint, and we butt heads quite often. And just being able to sit down and understand that he doesn't agree with what I see and I don't agree with what he sees, and we try our best to take the time and to understand each other. And it's not always the best situation, it's not always a comfortable conversation, but it's needed. Just being able to understand that he grew up in a different time and he didn't experience everything that's happening right now until he's much older. He's roughly 50, and he's not fully understanding what's happening. And I think me being in college at this time is definitely causing a different perspective in my mind, and being able to help him to understand that just what he thinks isn't always the best thing, and to kind of to help him and maybe change the language that he uses as well. Language is definitely very important right now.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you for adding that. I remember you talking to me about that before too. So, okay, so I think that what will be important to do is maybe just wrap it up now and keep these conversations going outside the session. Again, this will be available for viewing later, so you might want to share this with people, your acquaintances, your friends online, but also just in general, maybe as part of an educational effort, or start planning the next thing. One thing that we're going to do in preparation for and following the election is have some facilitated discussions about healing the heart of democracy. So you might want to watch for those sessions to be advertised soon. This will help people to be able to, I think, integrate some ways to deal with the emotions and anxieties around this fall's events, the election at the center of that, because we have a lot at stake in our democracy that people have different perspectives on. There are a lot of divisions around. So we're going to use those sessions to integrate some mind-body skills as a way to help people kind of, just meet that moment as calmly and as clear-headed as possible. But, again, it's about also just thinking about what do we need to be prepared for to vote? What do we need to make sure that we keep in mind to, keep democracy going and through other forms of civic engagement? So I would say that, just watch for that. And thank you so much for being part of this today. Did I miss anything, Kaylee?
No,
Renee, or
that is all. Looking back,
Diane?
it's just
The stamps from the beginning discussions. Stamp from the beginning discussions.
Yeah, and so those they're on Tuesday evenings every other week. Do you remember when the next one is, Renee?
It is September 29th.
Not this week, but yeah. So if you're interested through the Allegheny County Library System, there have been some really very, very rich conversations happening around Dr. Kendi's book, Stamped from the Beginning, that gives the history of, some of the issues of race and racism that we've had in our country. So, people have been able to listen to that on Spotify or free. I think you can get it even online through like YouTube, if I'm recalling the right search. But, the book's also available for checkout, and some of you, have been part of that. So we just thought we'd let you know about that. But continue to look for other Choose Civility events and Communication Leadership Lab events soon. And take care and be safe. Okay, take care of yourselves.
thanks, you too. Bye, everyone. Have a good evening.